Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched the massive space station grow larger on the viewing screen. The Federation Council station was huge beyond anything humans had ever built. It looked like a crystal flower, floating in space with hundreds of different sections connected by glowing tubes. Each section belonged to a different alien race that made up the Galactic Federation. Lisa Kane walked up beside him carrying a metal case. She was the cultural attaché for this mission, and her job was to share human culture with the aliens. The case held carefully chosen pieces of human art that she hoped would help the aliens understand humanity better. She had spent months picking the right paintings, sculptures, and photographs. "Are you ready for this?" Jake asked her. His voice was calm, but Lisa could see the worry in his eyes. This was the first time humans would officially meet with the Federation Council. Everything had to go perfectly. Lisa nodded and patted the case. "I have some of our best art in here. Van Gogh, Picasso, Ansel Adams, and some modern pieces too. Art is universal, right? It should help them understand who we are as a people." The ship docked at the station with a soft thud. Jake, Lisa, and 3 other crew members walked through the airlock into a corridor filled with the strangest sights Lisa had ever seen. Tall blue aliens with 4 arms walked past them. Floating jellyfish-like creatures drifted overhead. Small robot beings rolled along the floor. The air smelled like flowers and metal at the same time. A tall figure approached them. It looked like it was made of living crystal and stood 8 feet tall. Its voice sounded like wind chimes when it spoke. "I am Commander Vexter of the Zentari delegation. We welcome the humans to Federation space." Jake stepped forward and shook the alien's crystal hand. "Thank you, Commander. I am Captain Jake Morrison. This is Lisa Kane, our cultural specialist." They were led to a huge round room with a ceiling that showed the stars outside. Representatives from dozens of alien races sat in circles around them. Lisa had studied them all, but seeing them in person was different. The collective looked like walking trees with glowing leaves. The luminons were balls of light that changed colors when they spoke. The aquatic delegation sat in water tanks. Commander Vextar gestured to a table in the center. "Please share with us your cultural offerings so we may better understand your species." Lisa walked to the table and opened her case. She pulled out the first piece, a painting by Jackson Pollock. It was covered in splatters and drips of paint. In many colors, to human eyes, it was beautiful chaos that spoke of emotion and freedom. She held it up for all to see. "This is called abstract expressionism. The artist Jackson Pollock created this by dripping and splashing paint onto canvas. It represents the freedom of human creativity and our ability to find beauty in randomness." The entire room went silent. Every alien stared at the painting with intense focus. Lisa could hear her own heartbeat in the quiet. She had expected questions or comments, but not this strange silence. Commander Vexter leaned forward and his crystal body made small ringing sounds. "This pattern appears random, but it must contain significant information. What encryption method did your species use to embed the data?" Lisa blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry. What do you mean by encryption? This is just art. It's meant to be beautiful." A floating luminon pulsed bright red. "Beauty serves no survival function. This must be a communication method. The pattern complexity suggests advanced mathematical principles." Another alien that looked like a giant spider spoke up. "Our analysis indicates this contains at least 47 different geometric sequences. What tactical information does this convey?" Lisa looked at Jake, who seemed just as confused as she was. She turned back to the aliens. "There's no hidden information. The artist just wanted to express his feelings through paint. It's about emotion and creativity." The room erupted in chittering, humming, and flashing lights as the aliens discussed among themselves. Commander Vextar raised one of his crystal arms for silence. "You claim this random pattern serves no functional purpose, yet you present it as culturally significant. This suggests deception or misdirection." A tree-like collective member swayed as it spoke. "The humans must be testing our analytical abilities. This is clearly a puzzle designed to evaluate our intelligence." Lisa felt panic rising in her chest. This was going all wrong. She put the painting down and pulled out a photograph by Ansel Adams showing mountains and clouds in black and white. "Maybe this will be clearer. This is a photograph of natural beauty on our planet Earth." The aliens leaned forward again, a small robot being rolled closer to examine the image. "This appears to be a detailed topographical map. The shadow patterns indicate elevation changes and potential defensive positions. The cloud formations suggest weather manipulation technology," added another alien commander. Vextar looked at Lisa with what might have been suspicion. Your species presents military intelligence disguised as aesthetic appreciation. This is a sophisticated psychological warfare technique. Lisa shook her head desperately. No, you don't understand. We just think mountains are beautiful. We take pictures of them because they make us feel peaceful and happy. The word happy seemed to confuse the aliens even more. They began talking among themselves again in their various languages. Jake stepped up beside Lisa and whispered in her ear, "I think we have a problem." Lisa nodded as she watched the aliens examine her carefully chosen art with scientific instruments and analytical intensity. They were treating every brushstroke and shadow as if it contained secret codes. She realized that these alien races had never encountered the concept of art for art's sake. Everything in their cultures served a practical purpose. Commander Vexstar stood up tall and his crystal body rang like a bell. We must study these human cultural artifacts more carefully. They clearly contain advanced information that our first analysis cannot decode. We request time to properly examine these materials. Lisa wanted to explain again that the art was just art, but she could see it would be useless. The aliens had already decided that human creativity was actually a form of advanced communication or intelligence gathering. As the meeting ended and they were escorted back to their ship, Lisa realized she might have accidentally started the strangest misunderstanding in galactic history. Dr. Alan Brooks sat in his small office aboard the New Horizon reading reports that made no sense. As the mission's anthropologist, he studied alien cultures and behaviors, but the reports coming from Federation space were unlike anything he had seen before. Every major Federation world was requesting human art samples for urgent scientific analysis. 3 days had passed since Lisa's presentation to the Federation Council. The news had spread faster than anyone expected. Jake Morrison walked into Alan's office carrying a datapad with more incoming messages. "Look at this," Jake said, setting the pad down. "The Zentari Science Academy is offering us 50 tons of rare metals for one human finger painting. The collective wants to trade agricultural technology for what they call our chaos pattern methodology." Alan rubbed his temples. He had been trying to understand how art could cause such a massive reaction. The reports from our embassy staff are even stranger. Federation scientists are working around the clock analyzing the paintings Lisa showed them. They have teams of mathematicians trying to decode Van Gogh's brushstrokes. On the main screen, a news broadcast from the Federation capital played. The anchor was a tall blue Zentari who spoke in their typical emotionless tone. "Human, artistic, deception continues to baffle our greatest minds. The latest analysis of the mountain photograph suggests it contains star charts for 17 unknown solar systems." Jake shook his head. "How did they get star charts from Unsel Adams taking a picture of rocks?" The broadcast continued. "Military analysts warn that human art may contain psychological warfare elements designed to influence alien behavior patterns. Citizens are advised to avoid direct observation of human artistic materials." Alan paused the broadcast and turned to Jake. "Do you understand what's happening here? These aliens have never encountered art that doesn't serve a practical purpose. When they see our creative expression, they assume it must be hiding something important." Down in the ship's engineering section, Pete Collins was sketching mechanical diagrams for a new tool design. He always drew his ideas before building them. It helped him think through problems. He had no idea that his simple technical drawings were about to make the situation much worse. A Federation inspection team had come aboard to examine human technology. Commander Vexstar led the group with several other alien specialists. When they saw Pete's sketches scattered across his workbench, they stopped and stared. "These recreational drawings contain revolutionary engineering principles," Commander Vexstar announced to his team. A spider-like alien carefully photographed each sketch with scientific precision. Pete looked up from his work, confused. "Those are just rough ideas for a new wrench design. Nothing special about them." The aliens exchanged what might have been meaningful looks. The human claims these advanced technical specifications are merely recreational activities, the spider alien reported. "This confirms our suspicion that their entire species communicates through encoded visual materials." Word of Pete's recreational advanced engineering spread through Federation networks within hours. Scientists across dozens of worlds began studying every human technical drawing they could find. Engineering schools added courses on human symbolic technology transfer. Military academies warned cadets about the dangers of human visual psychological manipulation. Meanwhile, on the Federation water world of Aquinas, panic was spreading among the dolphin-like Cetarians. They had received samples of human music, and interpreted the sound patterns as sonic weapons designed to disrupt their echolocation abilities. Emergency meetings were called to discuss defense strategies against what they believed was an acoustic attack system disguised as entertainment. Dr. Alan Brooks received more disturbing reports. On the crystalline homeworld, their rigid mathematical society was experiencing what their leaders called chaos contamination. Young crystallines had begun growing asymmetrical body formations after studying Picasso's Cubist paintings. Their elders declared it a form of cultural warfare that threatened their species' survival. The situation grew worse when Federation Admiral Kethros arrived at the Council station with a fleet of research vessels. Alan watched through the communication screen as the Admiral's 6 eyes focused intensely on the camera. The human species has demonstrated capabilities far beyond our initial assessment, Admiral Kethros declared. Their ability to embed complex information in seemingly random patterns suggests advanced mental conditioning techniques. We must understand their methods before they can be used against us. Lisa Kane joined Alan and Jake in the communications room as more reports came in. Her face was pale with worry. They're treating finger paintings like they're nuclear weapons blueprints. A child's crayon drawing from Earth sold for enough money to buy a space station. The Federation's misunderstanding was creating unexpected consequences on Earth too. Art dealers who had never sold a painting for more than a few $1,000s were suddenly millionaires. Museums were hiring security teams to protect collections that aliens wanted to study. Every sketch, doodle, and creative work was being treated as a potential source of alien currency. Back on the Council station, teams of Federation scientists worked in shifts analyzing human art. They had built special laboratories with advanced scanning equipment to study every brushstroke and color choice. The Pollock painting that Lisa had shown them was being examined at the molecular level. We have identified over 300 distinct pattern variations, reported Chief Science Officer Zelmuth to her colleagues. The paint application shows deliberate chaos algorithms that our computers cannot fully process. The humans have created intentional randomness that serves an unknown purpose. None of the scientists considered that the unknown purpose might simply be beauty or emotional expression. In their logical worlds, everything existed for a reason. Art without function was impossible for them to understand. The media across Federation space was full of analysis and speculation. Talk shows debated whether humans were peaceful artists or dangerous psychological warriors. Some believed that human art was actually a test to see if other species were intelligent enough to decode their hidden messages. Others thought it was preparation for some kind of mental invasion. On the gas giant world of nebulos, the cloud-like nebuloids were experiencing their own crisis. They had studied human music and decided that rhythm patterns contained instructions for atmospheric manipulation. Their government banned all human audiophiles and declared them a threat to planetary weather systems. Dr. Alan Brooks compiled all the reports into a single document for Earth Command. The conclusions were almost impossible to believe. An entire galactic federation of intelligent species had decided that human artistic creativity was actually the most sophisticated information warfare system they had ever encountered. What do we do now? Lisa asked as they reviewed the situation. Do we tell them the truth and risk looking like we're lying, or do we play along with their misunderstanding? Jake looked out at the Federation station where hundreds of scientists were working to crack the secret codes they believed were hidden in human art. I think we may have accidentally become the most mysterious species in the galaxy, he said quietly. The question now was whether this misunderstanding would lead to war, wonder, or something completely unexpected. The Federation Council declared a state of emergency after 2 weeks of failed attempts to decode human art. Admiral Kethros stood before the assembled representatives of 47 different species and announced the creation of Project Decipher. It would be the largest scientific undertaking in Federation history, involving thousands of their brightest minds from every member world. Nina Williams, the New Horizons cultural officer, sat in the station's diplomatic quarters watching the emergency session on her communication screen. She had been trying for days to explain human creativity to various Federation scientists. But each explanation only seemed to convince them that humans were even more sophisticated than they had first believed. We cannot allow this human intelligence advantage to continue, Admiral Kethros announced to the Council. Their ability to embed strategic information in seemingly innocent creative materials poses a threat to Federation security. We must understand their methodology. Commander Vextar of the Zantari stood to address the assembly. His crystal body rang with authority as he spoke. Our preliminary analysis of human artistic materials reveals at least 14 different encryption systems. The complexity suggests their entire species operates on cognitive levels far beyond our initial assessment. Nina turned off the screen and walked to the observation deck, where she found Dr. Alan Brooks staring out at the Federation fleet that had gathered around the station. Hundreds of ships from dozens of different worlds, all focused on solving the mystery of human art. Any luck explaining creativity to them? Alan asked, without looking away from the ships. Nina shook her head. I showed them a child's drawing from Earth, a simple crayon picture of a house with a tree and a sun. They spent 6 hours analyzing the color choices and declared it was obviously a tactical deployment map for atmospheric insertion teams. The child's drawing had actually come from Nina's own daughter back on Earth. 7-year-old Amy Williams had drawn it during art class at school, never imagining that aliens would one day study it as if it contained military secrets. The Federation scientists had identified the yellow crayon sun as a nuclear energy source diagram and the green tree as a camouflaged communication. Array. Project Decipher's headquarters occupied an entire section of the Council Station. Through the transparent walls, Nina could see teams of aliens working with scientific equipment she didn't recognize. They had created detailed three-dimensional models of every brushstroke in the Pollock painting. Computers processed Van Gogh's color patterns, looking for mathematical sequences. Teams of linguists tried to translate what they believed were coded messages hidden in abstract expressionism. The project's scope kept growing as more human art samples arrived from Earth. Federation had requested everything from cave paintings to modern sculptures. Art museums were charging enormous fees for digital scans of their collections. Street artists found their sidewalk chalk drawings being analyzed by teams of alien cryptographers. Dr. Alexandra, the project's chief coordinator, was a tall insectoid alien with compound eyes and 4 manipulator arms. She had been working without rest since the project began, convinced that cracking human art codes would revolutionize Federation science. Nina watched her direct teams of specialists as they examined a simple landscape photograph. The human subject claims this image shows natural geological formations for aesthetic appreciation. Dr. Alexandra reported to her staff. However, our analysis reveals precise mathematical relationships between shadow angles and rock formations. This clearly demonstrates advanced terraforming technology disguised as recreational observation. Nina tried once more to approach the alien scientist. Dr. Alexandra, I really need you to understand that humans don't hide technology in our art. We create it because beauty makes us happy. The insectoid's compound eyes focused on Nina with what might have been pity. Your species' dedication to maintaining this deception is admirable but unnecessary. We do not seek to steal your technology, only to understand it for mutual benefit. The Federation's determination to decode human art was having unexpected consequences across their civilization. On the collective homeworld, individual drones had begun creating their own chaotic patterns instead of following hive directives. For the first time in their species' history, some collective members were thinking independently. The Zentari, known for their rigid logic and mathematical precision, were experiencing what their philosophers called systematic irrationality. Young Zentari had begun creating purposeless crystal formations after studying human sculpture. Their elders were horrified that their youth were wasting time and resources on activities that served no logical function. Meanwhile, the aquatic Cetarians on Aquanus had developed their own theory about human art. They believed that visual patterns were actually sonar maps, designed for underwater navigation. Cetarian military forces had begun creating abstract sculptures from coral formations, thinking they were learning human strategic planning methods. Nina received daily reports from Earth about the art market explosion. Gallery owners who had struggled to sell paintings for years were suddenly wealthy beyond their dreams. A child's finger painting had sold to Federation collectors for enough money to fund a small space mission. Art schools were overwhelmed with applications from people who wanted to create strategic visual communications. The most disturbing development came from the war faction within the Federation. War Council Praetor Zandix had been studying human art samples and reached a different conclusion than the scientists. He believed that human artistic creation was actually a form of psychological conditioning designed to prepare other species for mental domination. Observe how our youth abandon logical behavior after exposure to human patterns. Praetor Zandax argued before a military assembly. This is clearly a form of cognitive warfare designed to weaken our species' natural defenses. The humans are preparing us for conquest. Nina learned about Praetor Sandux's theory when Federation security forces began treating human art like biological weapons. Special containment procedures were developed for viewing human creative materials. Exposure time was limited and medical monitoring was required. Some Federation worlds banned human art entirely, declaring it a public health hazard. The absurdity reached new heights when Federation engineers began trying to reverse engineer what they thought was human technology, based on their interpretation of Picasso's cubism. Zentari architects developed new building techniques that created structures with impossible angles. Inspired by jazz music patterns, collective technicians invented communication systems that used seemingly random signals to carry complex information. The strange part was that some of these reverse-engineered technologies actually worked. The Zentari's impossible buildings were more efficient than traditional designs. The collective's jazz-inspired communication system could carry more information than their previous methods. The Federation was accidentally innovating by misunderstanding human creativity. Dr. Alan Brooks compiled reports on these developments with growing amazement. They're treating our art like it's the most sophisticated technology in the galaxy, he told Nina, and somehow their misinterpretations are leading to real scientific breakthroughs. Captain Jake Morrison had been following the situation from the New Horizons bridge. He called Nina and Alan to his ready room for a private meeting. Earth Command is asking questions about our mission status. They want to know if we should correct the Federation's misunderstanding or use it to humanity's advantage. Nina felt uncomfortable with the idea of deceiving the aliens, even though they were deceiving themselves. These species are changing their entire cultures because they think our art contains secret information. Is it right to let them continue believing something that isn't true? Alan looked at the reports spread across Jake's desk. The question is whether telling them the truth now would make things better or worse. They've invested so much in believing that human art is strategically important. If we tell them it's just creativity, they might feel humiliated or betrayed. Through the viewports, they could see the massive Project Decipher facility working around the clock. Thousands of the Federation's best minds were dedicated to solving a puzzle that had no solution because it wasn't actually a puzzle at all. The humans found themselves trapped in a situation they had never intended to create. They had come to share their culture and instead had accidentally convinced an entire Galactic Federation that human artistic creativity was the most advanced form of information warfare ever developed. The question now was what would happen when the truth eventually came out, and whether the Federation would ever forgive humanity for what they would see as the greatest deception in galactic history. 3 months after Project Decipher began, the Federation was experiencing changes that no one had predicted. What started as an attempt to decode human art had accidentally triggered the first cultural revolution in galactic history. Species that had followed the same patterns for thousands of years were suddenly creating new forms of expression that served no practical purpose. Sam Rodriguez had been running a small art gallery in downtown Chicago when the alien art market exploded. He now sat in his newly expanded gallery watching Federation representatives bid enormous sums for paintings that he had previously been unable to sell. A watercolor landscape that had been gathering dust for 2 years just sold for enough money to buy a luxury spacecraft. The bidding starts at 500,000 Federation credits for this human emotional pattern map, announced the alien auctioneer through Sam's communication screen. The painting was actually a simple, abstract piece by a local artist who painted landscapes for relaxation, but the Federation buyers treated it like a priceless strategic document. Sam had become wealthy beyond his wildest dreams, but he felt guilty about the deception. The aliens were paying fortunes for art because they believed it contained military or technological secrets. He had tried explaining that the paintings were just meant to be beautiful, but the alien collectors assumed he was protecting trade secrets. Meanwhile, on the water world of Aquanus, young Cetarians had begun creating what they called chaos sculptures from coral and seaweed. The traditional Cetarian elders were horrified as their youth abandoned functional construction in favor of purely aesthetic creation. Elder Splashstar called an emergency council meeting to address what he saw as a crisis of species identity. Our young ones waste time and resources creating patterns that serve no survival function, Elder Splashstar declared to the assembled Cetarian leadership. They claim to be learning human strategic thinking, but I fear they are losing their connection to practical reality. The young Cetarian artist, Wavesinger, had been experimenting with abstract coral formations after studying human sculpture samples. Her latest creation was a twisted spiral of different colored corals that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. She couldn't explain why she felt compelled to create it, only that the process made her feel something she had never experienced before. The patterns speak to something deep inside us, Wavesinger explained to her confused elders. The humans may have taught us more than strategic thinking. They may have shown us how to express parts of ourselves we never knew existed. Similar changes were happening across Federation space. On the crystalline world of Zerion, young Zentari had begun growing asymmetrical body formations that their elders considered chaotic and purposeless. The traditional geometric perfection that had defined Zentari culture for millennia was being abandoned by a generation that had been exposed to human creative expression. Crystal Song was one of these young Zentari rebels. She had grown her crystal body into flowing, organic shapes that resembled human sculptures rather than the precise mathematical forms of her ancestors. Her body sang with new harmonies that had never been heard in Zentari culture before. But humans have shown us that precision and logic are not the only valid forms of existence. Crystal Song explained to the Zentari High Council when they demanded she return to traditional form. Beauty and emotional expression serve purposes that our mathematics cannot measure. The collective was experiencing the most dramatic changes of all. Individual drones who had never had independent thoughts were suddenly creating personal projects that served no hive function. The collective queen mind was struggling to understand why her drones were developing individual personalities after exposure to human art patterns. Drone designation 7 branch had been assigned to analyze human music for hidden tactical information. Instead, she found herself creating her own sound patterns that had no strategic value. For the first time in collective history, a drone was making art for personal satisfaction rather than hive benefit. I do not understand these new patterns that emerge from my consciousness, 7 branch reported to her overseers. They serve no hive function, yet I feel compelled to create them. The human artistic methodology appears to activate dormant individual expression protocols. Earth was experiencing its own transformation as the art market boom continued. Frank Davis had been teaching elementary school art classes when alien collectors discovered his students' finger paintings. Suddenly, every crayon drawing and clay sculpture created by children was being treated as a potential masterpiece worth thousands of credits. Frank received an official request from the Federation Council to serve as a creative expression instructor. For alien species, they wanted him to teach their people how to make art without strategic purpose. Though they still didn't fully understand that this was what human art had always been. They're offering me a salary that's larger than my country's education budget, Frank told his wife over dinner. They want me to teach entire civilizations how to finger paint. The request had come because Federation scientists were beginning to realize that their attempts to decode human art were leading nowhere. After months of analysis, they had found no hidden messages, no secret technologies, and no strategic information. Instead, their reverse engineering efforts had accidentally led to genuine innovations in architecture, communication, and design. Dr. Alexandra stood before the Project Decipher team with a report that confused everyone involved. Our analysis has yielded unexpected results. While we have discovered no encoded information in human artistic materials, our attempts to replicate their patterns have led to breakthrough discoveries in multiple fields. The Federation's misunderstanding of human creativity had sparked innovation in ways no one anticipated. Zentari buildings designed using Picasso-inspired principles were more efficient and aesthetically pleasing than traditional structures. Collective communication systems based on jazz patterns carried information more effectively than their previous logical protocols. Satyrian coral sculptures had accidentally created new underwater habitats that improved marine ecosystem health. But not everyone in the Federation was pleased with these changes. War Council Praetor Zandex had been watching the cultural transformation with growing alarm. He saw the abandonment of traditional logical thinking as evidence that human art was actually a form of mental warfare designed to weaken Federation species. Observe how our youth abandon rational behavior after exposure to human patterns. Praetor Zandex addressed his military supporters. Our species are being systematically weakened by what the humans call creativity. This is preparation for conquest. Praetor Zandex had gathered support from conservative factions across multiple Federation worlds. They viewed the cultural changes as a threat to species survival and traditional values. His followers began preparing defensive measures against what they believed was an ongoing psychological attack by humanity. The tension reached a breaking point when Praetor Sandex analyzed a recording of Beethoven's Symphony No. 9 that had been shared as an example of human musical art. Using military pattern analysis software, he interpreted the musical structure as a detailed war anthem describing human battle strategies and psychological manipulation techniques. This audio pattern contains clear tactical sequences designed to coordinate large-scale military operations. Praetor Sandex announced to his council, "The humans are not sharing culture with us. They are preparing us for domination through artistic psychological conditioning." Nina Williams learned about Praetor Sandex's interpretation when Federation security began treating human music as potential acoustic weapons. Concert recordings were classified as military intelligence and access was restricted to authorized personnel only. The beautiful symphony that represented humanity's highest artistic achievement was being studied as if it were a blueprint for galactic conquest. Captain Jake Morrison received urgent communications from Earth Command as tensions escalated. Intelligence reports indicated that some Federation factions were mobilizing military forces in response to what they perceived as human, aggressive intentions hidden within artistic expression. "We came here to share our culture and accidentally convince them we're the most sophisticated psychological warriors in the galaxy," Jake told his senior staff. "Now some of them think we're preparing to invade using art as a weapon." The situation had spiraled far beyond what anyone could have imagined. What began as a simple cultural exchange had triggered a galactic crisis, where some aliens believed human creativity was actually a form of advanced warfare, while others were experiencing their first taste of individual artistic expression. The Federation stood on the edge of internal conflict between those who embraced the new creative possibilities and those who saw them as existential threats. Meanwhile, humanity remained largely unaware that their finger paintings and folk songs had accidentally started the most significant cultural upheaval in galactic history. Dr. Kate Murphy arrived at the Federation Council Station 6 months after the art crisis began. As Earth's leading expert in cross-species psychology, she had been sent to assess what everyone was calling the most complicated first contact situation in human history. What she found exceeded even her wildest expectations about how cultures could misunderstand each other. Her first briefing came from Nina Williams, who looked exhausted from months of trying to explain human creativity to alien minds that couldn't grasp the concept. They sat in the station's human quarters while outside the viewports. The massive Project Decipher facility continued its round-the-clock analysis of human art. "It's gotten completely out of control," Nina explained, while showing Kate the latest reports. "Half the Federation thinks we're master strategists communicating through art codes. The other half believes we're conducting psychological warfare to weaken their societies. And now some species are experiencing their first taste of individual creativity and don't know what to do with it." Kate studied the psychological profiles that Nina had compiled on various Federation species. The changes were remarkable and unprecedented. Species that had existed in rigid social structures for millennia were suddenly producing individuals who wanted to create things purely for personal satisfaction. The most dramatic case was happening within the collective. The hive-minded species had never experienced individual consciousness before, but exposure to human art patterns was triggering something that their scientists called singular awareness events. Individual drones were developing personal identities. For the first time in their species history, Queen Mind 7000 sent a desperate message to the human delegation requesting immediate assistance. Her transmission appeared on Kate's communication screen as a complex pattern of lights and sounds that the translation system converted into understandable language. "The human artistic methodology has activated unprecedented cognitive phenomena within our collective consciousness structure," Queen Mind 7000 reported. "Individual drones are exhibiting personal creative impulses that serve no hive function. We require immediate consultation on managing singular identity emergence protocols." Kate realized that the Queen Mind was asking humans to teach her people how to be individuals. An entire species that had shared consciousness for millions of years wanted to learn how to think independently because they had been exposed to human creativity. Meanwhile, the Zentari High Council was facing their own crisis. Their perfectly logical civilization was being disrupted by young Zentari who had abandoned mathematical precision in favor of what they called emotional pattern creation. Traditional Zentari leaders couldn't understand why their youth were wasting time on activities that served no logical purpose. High Council Leader Prism Perfect sent an official request to Captain Jake Morrison, asking for human instructors to teach proper strategic creativity management. The Zentari still believed that human art contained hidden tactical information, but they wanted to learn how to control the emotional responses it triggered in their people. Frank Davis found himself in the strangest situation of his teaching career when he was officially appointed as the Federation's first Minister of Creative Expression. His job was to travel between alien worlds and teach entire civilizations how to make art without strategic purpose, though most of the aliens still didn't believe that such a thing was possible. His first assignment took him to the Zentari homeworld, where he was asked to conduct what they called emotional pattern workshops for young Zentari who had been affected by human artistic influence. Frank stood before a classroom of crystal beings who had grown themselves into shapes that defied their species' traditional geometry. "Today we're going to learn finger painting," Frank announced to the assembled Zentari students. The translation system struggled with the concept since Zentari didn't have fingers, but Frank had brought brushes and paint, suitable for crystal manipulation. The young Zentari approached the art supplies with scientific precision, trying to analyze the optimal paint application strategies for maximum tactical effectiveness. Frank watched in amazement as they began creating abstract patterns while discussing the military applications of color theory. "Remember, there's no right or wrong way to do this," Frank told them. "Just let your feelings guide your choices." The concept of feelings guiding choices was revolutionary to the Zentari students. Crystal Song, who had become a leader among the artistic rebels, created a painting that made musical sounds as the paint dried. She couldn't explain why she chose certain colors, only that they felt right to her. This emotional decision-making protocol produces results that our logic cannot predict or evaluate, Crystal Song told Frank after completing her painting. Yet the outcome generates internal satisfaction responses that we have never experienced before. Frank realized he was witnessing the birth of individual emotional expression in a species that had never valued anything beyond logical efficiency. The Zentari students were learning to make choices based on feelings rather than calculations, and it was transforming their understanding of existence. Back on the council station, Dr. Kate Murphy was analyzing the broader psychological implications of what was happening across Federation space. Her reports to Earth Command painted a picture of accidental cultural revolution on a galactic scale. "We're observing the emergence of individual creativity in species that have never experienced it before," Kate wrote in her official assessment. "The Federation's misinterpretation of our art has triggered evolutionary psychological changes that may be irreversible." The changes weren't limited to young aliens either. On the gas giant world of Nebulos, elderly nebuloids who had spent centuries following atmospheric flow patterns were suddenly creating abstract cloud formations that served no weather function. The planet's meteorological systems were being disrupted by artistic expression. Elder Cloudrift had been a respected atmospheric engineer for over 300 years before she saw her first human abstract painting. Something about the chaotic beauty triggered responses in her consciousness that she didn't understand. She began manipulating cloud patterns, not for weather control but because the shapes pleased her aesthetically. "The human visual patterns activate dormant pleasure centers in our neural networks," Elder Cloudrift explained to her confused colleagues. "We have discovered that atmospheric manipulation can generate satisfaction responses beyond mere functional efficiency." The cultural revolution was accelerating as more species discovered the concept of creativity for its own sake. Aquatic Satyrians were building coral sculptures that created beautiful underwater light shows. Rock-based Geolithians were carving artistic patterns into mountain faces that served no structural purpose. Even the energy-based Luminans were experimenting with light patterns that conveyed emotion rather than information. But the revolution faced growing opposition from conservative factions led by War. Council Preeters, his interpretation of human art as psychological warfare, had gained support among species who viewed the cultural changes as threats to their traditional ways of life. Pretor Zandex had been analyzing human cultural materials with military intelligence tools and reached increasingly paranoid conclusions. When he studied recordings of human orchestras performing classical music, he interpreted the synchronized movements of musicians as evidence of advanced crowd control techniques. "Observe how humans coordinate large groups through audio pattern manipulation," Pretor Zandex demonstrated to his followers. "This Beethoven composition clearly contains subliminal commands for mass behavioral modification. The humans are training their invasion forces while pretending to share entertainment." His faction began mobilizing military forces across several Federation worlds. They established quarantine protocols for human artistic materials and developed what they called creative contamination countermeasures. Any Federation citizen who showed signs of individual artistic expression was subjected to psychological evaluation and potential treatment. The tension reached a critical point when Zandex declared that the Federation Council had been compromised by human psychological manipulation. He pointed to the fact that many council members had begun displaying individual creative behaviors as proof that their judgment was no longer reliable. Captain Jake Morrison received urgent warnings from Federation allies that Pretas was preparing to launch preemptive strikes against human space. The war faction believed that humanity was using art as preparation for galactic conquest, and that immediate action was necessary to prevent Federation subjugation. Dr. Kate Murphy realized that the situation had reached a breaking point. The Federation was splitting into two camps: those who embraced the new creative possibilities that human art had accidentally introduced, and those who saw creativity as a dangerous infection that threatened their species' survival. "We have to tell them the truth," Kate told the human delegation during an emergency meeting. "They're about to start a war because they think we're conducting psychological warfare with finger paintings and folk songs." Nina Williams looked at the reports of Federation fleets gathering at the edges of human space. War fleets from 12 Federation worlds gathered at the edges of human space while Captain Jake Morrison made the most important decision of his career. The misunderstanding about human art had reached the point where weapons were being aimed at Earth because aliens believed that finger paintings were actually psychological warfare tools. Something had to be done before the greatest cultural confusion in galactic history became the shortest war. Jake stood on the bridge of the New Horizon with his entire crew around him. Through the viewports they could see Praetor Zandex's flagship leading a massive battle formation. The war faction had convinced themselves that humanity was preparing for galactic conquest using artistic mind control techniques, and they intended to strike first. "Open a galactic broadcast channel," Jake ordered his communications officer. "I want every Federation world to receive this transmission." Dr. Kate Murphy joined Jake at the center of the bridge along with Nina Williams and Frank Davis. They had decided that the only way to prevent war was to show the Federation exactly what human art really was. In real time, with no possibility of misinterpretation, the broadcast began with Jake addressing the camera directly. "Citizens of the Galactic Federation, I am Captain Jake Morrison of the human exploration vessel New Horizon. We need to talk." Across Federation space, billions of aliens stopped what they were doing to watch the transmission. On the Council station, Project Decipher scientists paused their analysis work. In the war fleets, military officers gathered around their screens. On dozens of different worlds, species that had been transformed by exposure to human creativity waited to hear what the mysterious humans would finally reveal. "For the past 6 months, you have been trying to decode secret messages that you believe are hidden in human art," Jake continued. "You have convinced yourselves that our paintings contain tactical information, our music contains military strategies, and our sculptures contain technological blueprints. But you are wrong about all of it." Jake stepped aside to reveal Maria Gonzalez, a professional artist who had been brought aboard specifically for this moment. She sat at an easel with a blank canvas, holding a brush and a palette of simple acrylic paints. The camera focused on her as she began to paint. "This is Maria Gonzalez," Jake explained as Maria started applying paint to the canvas. "She is going to create a piece of human art while you watch. There are no hidden codes, no secret messages, and no strategic information. She is painting because humans find the act of creation beautiful and emotionally satisfying." Maria began painting a simple landscape scene. Rolling hills under a sunset sky with a few trees in the foreground. Her brushstrokes were confident and peaceful as she built up layers of color. The camera captured every movement of her brush, every choice of color, every decision about composition. Across the Federation, aliens watched in stunned silence as Maria painted. There were no mathematical calculations guiding her choices. No strategic planning determined her color selection. She painted the sunset orange and pink because she thought those colors looked beautiful together. She added trees because the composition felt balanced that way. "Maria is not encoding military information," Jake narrated as she worked. "She is not embedding psychological warfare techniques. She is not preparing invasion plans or conducting mind control experiments. She is creating something beautiful, because the act of creation brings her joy." On the Zentari homeworld, Crystal Song watched a broadcast with her fellow art students. For the first time, she understood what she had been trying to express through her own creative experiments. The human wasn't solving a logical problem or achieving a strategic objective. She was simply making something beautiful because it felt good to do so. The pleasure response we experience during creative activities is not a side effect of strategic thinking, Crystal Song whispered to her classmates. It is the entire purpose of the activity itself. In the collective hive centers, individual drones experienced something like revelation as they watched Maria paint. Seven Branch, who had been creating her own sound patterns, finally understood that the strange satisfaction she felt during creation wasn't a malfunction in her programming. It was the discovery of individual artistic expression. Queen Mind 7000 transmitted a message to her entire collective consciousness network. The human creative methodology serves no hive function because it is designed to serve individual consciousness. We have been attempting to decode strategic information when we should have been learning personal expression. On the water world of Aquinas, young Cetarians like Wavesinger suddenly understood why their coral sculptures made them feel peaceful and satisfied. Elder Splashtar watched the broadcast with growing amazement as he realized that the chaotic patterns his youth had been creating weren't attempts to learn human military tactics. They were expressions of individual creativity that his species had never experienced before. Maria continued painting while Jake provided commentary. Human creates art differently because each person has their own unique perspective and emotional response to beauty. Some humans paint realistic landscapes like Maria. Others create abstract patterns with no recognizable shapes. Some make music, others make sculptures, and some just doodle in the margins of their notebooks during meetings. As Maria added final details to her sunset landscape, the true nature of human creativity became undeniably clear to the watching Federation. There was no hidden complexity, no encrypted information, and no strategic purpose. The painting was exactly what it appeared to be, a simple, beautiful representation of a peaceful scene that made the artist happy to create. Frank Davis stepped into the camera view holding finger paints and paper. This is how human children first learn to create art, he explained while dipping his fingers in bright colors. They don't calculate optimal pigment distribution or analyze tactical color combinations. They just put their hands in paint and make marks because it's fun. Frank created a simple handprint design on the paper, adding basic shapes and lines around it. The result was the kind of artwork that decorated refrigerators in human homes across Earth. To Federation eyes that had been analyzing similar children's art for months, the simplicity was shocking. War Council Praetor Zandex watched the broadcast. From his flagship with growing confusion and anger, everything he had believed about human psychological warfare was crumbling before his eyes. The sophisticated mind control system he had identified was actually just people making pretty pictures. For fun. This cannot be the complete truth, Praetor Zandex announced to his officers. The humans must be concealing deeper strategic purposes behind this apparent simplicity. But across the Federation, other voices were beginning to speak up. Commander Vexter of the Zentari transmitted a message to the war fleet. Analysis of the live broadcast confirms that human artistic creation follows no logical strategic patterns. We have been misinterpreting recreational creative expression as military intelligence. Admiral Kethros, who had initially supported the investigation into human art codes, reviewed all the evidence with new understanding. His scientific teams had found no hidden messages because there were no hidden messages to find. The Federation had spent months trying to decode random beauty. Maria finished her painting and held it up for the camera. The sunset landscape was gentle and peaceful, exactly the kind of art that humans hung in their homes to create a calming atmosphere. There was nothing threatening or strategic about it. It was simply beautiful. This is what human art has always been, Jake concluded the broadcast. We create beauty because it makes us happy. We share it with others because we want them to experience that happiness too. When we offered to share our culture with you, we never imagined you would interpret finger paintings as warfare manuals. The Federation's response was immediate and overwhelming. On dozens of worlds, aliens who had been creating their own art for months suddenly understood what they had been experiencing. The pleasure they felt during creative activities wasn't the result of decoded strategic information. It was the discovery of individual artistic expression. Young Federation citizens, who had been experimenting with chaotic patterns and emotional creativity, realized they hadn't been learning human military tactics. They had been learning how to express their own unique perspectives and feelings through creative activities. The war fleets began standing down as the truth spread through Federation space. Praetor Xandix found himself increasingly isolated as his own officers recognized that there had never been any human threat to decode or defend against. Dr. Lixandra stood before the Project Decipher team and officially declared the investigation complete. Analysis confirms that human artistic materials contain no encoded strategic information. The complexity we identified was the result of individual creative expression rather than systematic intelligence embedding. But the revelation brought its own challenges. Some Federation species felt embarrassed that they had misunderstood something so fundamental about human culture. Others worried that they had changed their societies based on a mistake. Conservative factions argued that the new creative behaviors should be abandoned now that their supposed strategic purpose had been revealed as illusion.